Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Let's face it, the future is now. We're living in a connected cyber society, and we need to stop ignoring it or pretending that it's not affecting us. Join us as we explore how humanity arrived at this current state of digital reality and what it means to live amongst so much technology and data. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high-net-worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io. RSA Security offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk that hinges on integrated visibility, automated insights, and coordinated actions. Learn more at rsa.com. BugCrowd's award-winning platform combines actionable contextual intelligence with the skill and experience of the world's most elite hackers to help leading organizations identify and fix vulnerabilities, protect customers, and make the digitally connected world a safer place. Learn more at bugcrowd.com.
Marco.
Sean.
Did you feel it?
Obviously not.
Not the earthquake.
Obviously not. Plus, we're used to it in LA. So
exactly. There's always that. Now is the algorithm and the information that flooded and pulsed through your body.
I wish that there was an alert or some noise or, my phone beeping. It's telling me that the algorithm is taking over. But I think that if that was the case, it would be going off constantly because our life is pretty much interacting with algorithm every moment, way more than what we believe it is.
I would argue that we probably are a little numb to it. Already, even if it's not alert driven, I think we're numb to it, but I don't know. And that's why, Marco, we have others. We have a guest to help us figure this stuff out.
Of course, we bring up the questions and then hopefully there are answers. Although I have to say that today, and then we're going to introduce our guest, we're going to talk about social media disinformation and algorithms. And I guess we can kind of go into information in general and the bubble maybe that the social media have been creating around us. And hopefully, what could we do about it? So to talk about this, we have a guest, which is Cody Buntain. I hope I pronounced it correctly, from the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And he's a researcher and author and interested in exactly this topic that we just introduced. So I'll let you introduce yourself because I'm sure you'll do a much, much better job than what I did.
I'm Marco. Sean, thanks so much for having me. So I am a professor and assistant professor of informatics at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And informatics is supposed to be this area where we research the intersection between technology, artificial intelligence, computer science, these kinds of areas, and society. This covers a broad spectrum, and there are information schools at other universities. My department is informatics, like I said. My background originally started in cybersecurity. I did a lot of work for small security contractors in the DoD, understanding and working on how we can make technology more secure. And then when I got into the PhD program at the University of Maryland, where I got my degree in computer science, I moved closer and closer to the human aspects of security. First, working on how people use social media and online information sources during crises, in the aftermath of earthquakes, terrorist attacks, hurricanes, and the information quality problems that we have when we engage in collective sense-making, which really flowed nicely into the concerns about false news, fake news, misinformation, and disinformation in the lead up to the 2016 election. And now I do a lot of work in this area. How can we protect and provide a safer online environment for the population, and how are platforms trying to be better about addressing issues of algorithms and how these algorithms influence the information that you consume on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love it. This is going to be so cool. So Cody, when we do a ton of conversations or have a ton of conversations at the business level where we're looking at security and privacy, and we often come to a point where we say the technology is the technology, the business is the business. It's really hard to bridge that gap. And I have a feeling the same is true when you're researching the connection between technology and society. And so my first thing I'd like to hear from you is what's the department look like? Is it a lot of tech guys and gals? Is there a lot of societal folks looking at behavior and things like that, or what's the mix of the organization or the department?
That's a great question. So at informatics at NJIT, we have a number of people sort of across the spectrum doing the kinds of work, political and social engagement with technology like I do. More HCI, human-computer interaction people who work on artificial intelligence or augmented reality and virtual reality systems, also cybersecurity. We also have people who are not teched up. They are people in education or people doing psychology, trying to understand the impact or motivations of people and why they share or how they engage. What are their motivations for volunteering their time and large-scale moderation efforts? Like, why do people engage on Wikipedia and these sort of massive peer production kinds of environments? Other sorts of information schools have much broader areas as well, from education to digital archival. How do we preserve all the information that we have? How do we make these kinds of technologies more useful for many other kinds of aspects of society, from search and information retrieval to online discovery for law firms to medical records? How do we make that information accessible and available?
Yeah, and I want to start with the non-technical part, because of course I'm going to leave that to Sean. And you said something that, especially when you look at it from a sociological and social psychological perspective, you say, when there are time of disasters, of social unrest, of fears, or uncertainty, let's say,
right,
that's when we are more vulnerable as a society to
absolutely, yeah,
a lot of things. And it's easy to open the door to some kind of manipulation that could be for political purposes, to propaganda, or any other thing. And of course, it's scary the amount of things that we see nowadays. So can you maybe explain how we got here, maybe with the algorithm? And then I'm assuming towards the end of the conversation, maybe what could be done to get us out of here with algorithm, probably.
Right. So there are two sort of paths that have merged. In the aftermath of any sort of social unrest or crisis event, oftentimes we lack a clear authoritative source of information, partially because the authorities are slow getting a handle of what's happening, slow getting that information out there, and also because there just isn't a core understanding of what's happened in the world yet. In the Boston Marathon bombing, there was a lot of coverage, but lots of uncertainty about what was happening within Boston. The year before that, in the earthquake in Port-au-Prince in Haiti, there was basically no infrastructure left, and much of the information that NGOs and volunteers got was from sharing information on social media, using the platforms and mediums available to them to share and engage. So there's always this need for people to try and consume and make sense of what's going on around them. And they'll use whatever resources are available to them to do that. Social media, having grown up at around that time, was becoming much more popular and became a core source of information for the public during these times. And oftentimes there's not a whole lot of expertise among the disaster management personnel to use these channels and platforms. So that's the need for the information. The information consumers go to these places because they need to understand what's happening, whether they're immediately impacted or whether they're thousands of miles away and want to share some feeling or share some sort of collective or social support aspect, like we saw in the Nepalese earthquake. Hugely popular online, but most people who were talking about it online weren't affected. At the same time, you have technology companies who are engaging in building platforms to allow people to share and engage and communicate. And originally, back in the early versions of Twitter and Facebook, where we're trying to understand, well, how do we make information available to people? Much of that technology was just based on, well, here's the most recent post from a friend, and you get this nice time frame or temporal list of information. But as these platforms became more popular, you have way too much information to present in a way that's just temporally ordered. So you have to engage with the algorithmic side of information to start trying to understand, well, what people want to see, what kinds of information are their friends sharing that they're likely to engage with. And now you have this confluence of people who want information and platforms that are trying to figure out what information you're going to not just view and consume, but what information are you most likely to want, most likely to engage with. And then these platforms and technology companies start optimizing for engagement. How do we get more people on the platform? How do we keep them on the platform? How do we keep them scrolling on their pages, watching more videos? And that puts us in a very unfortunate kind of space, because oftentimes the high quality, good journalistic content, or the happy, warm, fuzzy feeling kinds of content are not going to be the things that keep you engaged. And then you have old media, sort of it bleeds, it leads kinds of negative stories that are outrageous or wild. Those get a lot of engagement. And that has brought us to this place where people want information. They need information during times of unrest. And the information they get that the systems try and motivate them towards is information that is, in some sense, outrageous or divisive, trying to keep them on the platform.
Yeah, and Cody, I'm interested in, perhaps it's driven by some of the research you're doing, but do people tend to pick one platform or one medium to consume news or other information and another to contribute to? And I'm wondering, because you mentioned the news media, right? So are they driven by algorithms, or how do they pick the stories? How do they talk about it? Where do they invest putting people on the ground versus not? Those types of things. And how does that compare to a Facebook or a Twitter or an Instagram or some other platform? And is there an algorithm over all of that? Or are they multiple algorithms? Or how does that look?
It's a great question. It's a mix of a number of different things. So the first aspect is whether people engage on multiple places. And the answer to that is definitively yes. There's great survey work out of Pew Research showing that the median American generally uses 3 different social media platforms of some form. Oftentimes it's YouTube as the number 1, Facebook as the number 2, and then it's going to be some other thing, either Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, one of these other platforms. There's good evidence that shows you behave differently on different platforms. Why you choose to engage on one platform, or the kind of content you choose to share on one platform versus another, is in some sense strategic. But it's generally an interaction between, well, what do you want to share, and that dopamine response of how much engagement interaction are your friends giving you on that particular platform. Now, if you take a step back and try and understand the interaction between these platforms, this engagement and these algorithms and news media, there's a similar kind of process going on. I won't say it's an algorithm that's driving all of this, but there is definitely some process where news organizations want to engage with broader consumers. News organizations make money off of advertising, so they need to have these large audiences, because Facebook's primary source of income isn't the data you share, it's the advertising that they get. And that, I think, drives a lot of behavior on both the news organizations and the platform side. And then these news organizations will tailor specific news stories or headlines to the platform of interest. So the New York Times may share an article on Twitter with one headline, and they may share that exact same article on Facebook with a slightly different headline, under the expectation that the audiences are different and how the people are going to come across their Facebook post is going to be different than how they come across their Twitter post.
What's interesting about all of this is mass media has always worked like this, except with less reach, let's say. Even a big reach back in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. I mean, there's always that commercial side of it that you mentioned. And so, like, I gotta give the public what the public wants,
right? So
that I can get sponsors, advertiser, and have more extension on my readership, which means money. On the other hand, you have a responsibility to filter what the hell you're talking about. Maybe you need to have the sources. You have to have journalists that have done some research. So when we used to say, well, it's on the newspaper, so it's true, and then we went to, oh, it's on the internet, so it must be true. Well, not necessarily, because the game has changed to the point where social media don't claim, and actually they don't want to be considered publications, but just so that's an important key, I think, in the conversation, right?
Well, I think that one of the major differences or differentiating factors here is the barrier to entry or gatekeeping. So there's an expectation that if you are publishing a newspaper or you are on one of the major news organizations, you went through some process to get to that place. And then you have a large audience who trusts you, and your reputation is tied to the quality of reporting or quality of content you share. Now, with social media, there's no reason for that anymore. You don't have to have that. As long as you can build an audience and show that you're monetizable, that's generally sufficient, right? You can build the audience regardless of how high quality your content is. At the same time, there's an economic argument about, well, for a long time, there was a void of information. There was an unfilled space for outrageous or extreme news coverage, or coverage that provides a very alternative view of the world. And I think the proliferation of social media has allowed people to tap into that desire. Both this in sort of a cycle or self-perpetuating cycle between, an algorithm that's pushing more engagement and more extreme content, but also an audience that is continuously, or whose trust in public institutions continuously eroding, and now they are going to all kinds of different places to get their information, whether it's information that's consistent with their beliefs or pushing them further is an open and interesting and important question that we have to deal with, though.
And do we know if people focus in on the things they want to hear, or are we still open enough to hear something that may not align with our beliefs and accept it as that's one point of view? Or are we being trained by the algorithms through whatever emotional experience comes from engaging on these platforms to ignore these things and treat them as fake news or misinformation or disinformation?
This is an interesting question because I don't think there is good consensus on this yet. The idea that motivated reasoning is what's driving you to consume all this content, I think doesn't have a lot of support. The idea that, I'm only going to engage with content that is aligned with my beliefs, I don't think we have good evidence for that. Social media in general has been shown to provide cross-cutting exposure to news. Even if you're on Facebook or Twitter, where we think about there being these large echo chambers that only reflect back what you want to hear, the evidence suggests it's not unlikely for you to encounter counter-attitudinal information on your feed, which I think is a good thing. The question is, does that exposure to counter-attitudinal information really help you be a better citizen or inform you more? And we don't really know that. There's a recent book out just this past year that looks at this, where they put people in a lab and showed them information that was consistent with their beliefs, and then actively injected a lot of counter-attitudinal information into their feed. And this actually seemed to radicalize people more. People who were exposed to more information from the other side didn't just ignore it, they actually seemed to double down on their partisan beliefs. This is a certain population, but that is troubling, that if we try and show you information from the other side, there are sources that try and do that now, if that actually makes things worse for you or radicalizes you more, then it becomes unclear how we deal with this problem.
Yeah, and the thing that comes to mind here is if we're talking about algorithms and presenting more information to help that connects with people in ways that they like to be connected with, the first thing that comes to mind are bots, right? Where it's all about get the information out there. Use the example of on Facebook, it's one heading, on the news, it's another, on Twitter, maybe it's another.
Right.
So it's all these A/B tests that are taking place. And if we can not have a human behind that, if it's a bunch of bots creating all this content to see what's working, why does it work, what's the response we get, the machine, not necessarily the platform, but the bots, people or technology pretending to be people,
right,
driving a lot of this. What's your view on that? Do people recognize that there are bots and that information is coming from things that aren't human?
Yes, I think in the general case, automated amplification or the use of bots is not very easy to hide. People are pretty good at being able to identify whether an account is an automated source. Surprisingly, it doesn't seem to matter in some cases. So there was a good bit of work looking at how people engaged with accounts that appeared to be partisan bots, and even were very open about it. They'd have an icon that was of a robot, and they'd say in their profile on Twitter, "I'm a bot," and they'd share conservative or liberal content, though a particular bot would generally share a particular kind of content, and people would still argue with them. They'd still engage in arguments with a bot, and for reasons that are very unclear. Like, what is your motivation for engaging in a system that you know is not going to engage back with you? But yet, I think people are pretty good at identifying bots. Though, as bot technology increases, or becomes more sophisticated, or language generation software becomes more sophisticated, certainly it'll become harder to distinguish.
Yeah, I know you're a robot, but I'm still gonna win.
Right.
I'm still gonna have the final word. I don't care.
Well, that's the big question.
Yeah, I know. Except you're not gonna win that one. Okay, so Cody, a question here. Let's look a little bit more in. This is what we are. This is how we got here.
Right.
Algorithm had the good intention of, I just can't show everything. I can't keep a river-like timeline that shows everything. I'm trying to do the right thing, and then it turned out that it created echo chambers and so on. Now we are trying to tweak this algorithm so that it goes back to break that echo chamber to see hate speech, fake news, and all of that. And we know that the social media company are trying really hard to do that.
Right.
And I know that part of your research is what are they doing and how is it working, if it is working. So tell us a little bit about what the solution looks like they could be.
Absolutely. Well, the first point I want to make is that echo chambers themselves are not inherently bad. Now, you could imagine, so I grew up in Alabama. Imagine you are some trans kid or some minority kid growing up in Alabama. There's nobody like you in your little town, but social media allows you to go find a community that's going to be supportive of you and understanding of you. And that in some sense is an echo chamber, but is hugely valuable for their well-being. At the same time, you have an echo chamber that allows people who have white supremacist tendencies to go find their community who supports them, even if it's not socially acceptable. So it's the echo chamber idea isn't intrinsically bad, but it can contribute to antisocial kinds of behavior. So platforms now, I think, have come around to two fundamental shifts in their approach to this. One is that there's enough public concern about this issue that if they do nothing, then they risk impacting their bottom line. For a long time, they could just say that this wasn't a problem. The public didn't care. But now that SNL makes fun of it or brings up issues about it, the public is sufficiently concerned. These platforms have to respond. And then the second main thing that I think they've come around to is you can't be neutral. If you say it's not a problem and we're not going to do anything about it, then you've in fact picked a side, because we know that preferencing engagement over all else has a lot of negative outcomes in terms of the kind of content that you are propagating. So the platforms now have come around to this idea that they have to act and they have to take action against particular kinds of content. The paper I have out this year looks at how YouTube has approached this from a deplatforming and derecommendation perspective, looking at particular kinds of content that was extremist or potentially harmful or misinforming. YouTube's approach was, we'll allow you to have a place on our platform. You can post these videos, but we don't have to engage in helping you propagate them. We don't recommend them to people. And that, from my research, has had a significant effect, not just on recommendations within YouTube, but on how people are sharing this content on other platforms as well. So we looked at partisan extreme right content, and we looked at conspiracy content. And YouTube's approach to derecommending this content has had a pretty significant effect on how people share on Twitter and Reddit. And I think what this shows is, if you can tweak the incentives, if you can change what the norms of the platform are and say, well, you can share this content, but there's no financial incentive to share this content, which is what drives, I think, much of this. The platforms are taking good steps to address this issue.
So that's a bit of technology there, right? Clearly they're changing algorithms to do certain things.
Right.
I'm wondering what the role of the user is here, and society as a bigger picture. Will we hold people accountable? Will we hold each other accountable, do you think, for sharing information that is not acceptable, but then who is it acceptable for versus not? So what do we see society doing here to help solve some of this?
That's a good question about society. The difficulty with this from a societal perspective is, even if you had a platform that was very good at social pressure against antisocial behavior. Say on Twitter, the vast majority of the population on Twitter might then, if you post some white supremacist or Nazi content, they all yell at you and eventually stop. And then there's actually some pretty good evidence that Instagram is a good example of this. The platform is an okay place where people will sort of yell at you if you do things that are quite bad. But the concern is, does this just move people to other platforms where they can share this kind of content? So you have a proliferation of these sort of alternative spaces like Gab or BitChute or Parler that are all essentially supposed to be moderation light, free speech platforms, cousin to the Facebooks, Twitters, and YouTubes of the world. And I don't know if society can address this problem holistically, because as long as there's a need or a market for these kinds of for this kind of content, people will find a place or find a way to monetize it. There is good question, or a set of good questions, about what the role of legislation is in this space, and whether society can get behind legislation that drives or can control some of these kinds of content. But it's very unclear what that legislation looks like that allows you to balance between moderation, platform and content moderation, and recognizing free speech rights that we, at least in the United States and in many countries, hold very dear. Some countries don't have this issue as much because they have a very different history with nationalistic content. The United States, this is a core concern for society to deal with.
Yeah, as we wrap these conversation that we can't really wrap, we're going to put it on a side for a little bit. And then maybe we talk again about this as we usually do.
The steak is turning into jerky. Is that what you're saying?
Well, pretty much. Or, we have to reopen the box, the black box, and maybe keep it in a transparent box instead. So we need to look at what's going on. And I think, as you said, some steps are being taken, but as a friend of ours said one time, you just can't take out yourself out of every problem.
Right.
And even if you tweak the algorithm, as you said, most of these are ethical decision, are societal decision, and freedom is dear to everyone. But how does and where does freedom stop? it's almost like the paradox of tolerance of Karl Popper, right?
Right.
And when you start crossing on my turf and you're hurting me, and I can't tolerate you to be intolerant, and so I'm not tolerant anymore. So with this said, I think that some steps, as you said, they've been done. And I think that we can definitely see that there is a problem, and we're working on it. It's not easy, because I feel like this problem has always been there. Right. And any time in history that there's been an emperor, a king, or any kind of propaganda, that we had that problem. Burn the books, rewrite history.
Yeah. And one of the major difficulties here is that while the major platforms are taking steps to change the incentives of sharing on their platform, which I think is a huge step, because as long as you take out the monetary incentive to produce this content, then only the true believers will share and try and radicalize people, which I think has true value. And if the major platforms are doing this, I think that also is good, even if there's a constellation of fringe platforms, because you can't stop that. There always will be places for people to go share this content. As long as the incidents of incidental exposure of somebody who's just like looking for videos about whatever, as long as they're not exposed to this content in a common way or a very frequent way, I think that's a good step forward. The now major societal problem we have to deal with is, how do you disambiguate exactly the point you make, Marco, about where does propaganda and what's being shared become built in or a major part of the political discussion? Because now we see there's a huge concern in Congress from the liberals about how these platforms are being used and how they're flexing their technological muscle, and from the conservatives about how these platforms are potentially censoring conservative voices. And this is a big problem.
Yep, and I'm super thankful we solved it today.
Absolutely.
Yes, and
good to go.
And the good news is everybody can go to this episode and look in the notes, and all the answers will be right there. The problem is, it's in the form of a question, getting you to think with some data to help you understand what you're thinking about, so that you can formulate that answer yourself. But in all seriousness, Cody, I'm going to thank you for joining us and bringing your insight and the research of your department to ITSP Magazine and our listeners. We will certainly include links to papers that you've written, books that are available, other research and other resources you think would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
For people to think about this, from societal, personal, governmental research, whatever it is that they're interested in. Hopefully they'll find something that they can start to chew on and help move this forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting and good questions here about why people share, what are the motivations. Nicely, that it's not a partisan issue. People on the left are not intrinsically better at dealing with this than people on the right. So there's lots of things to read up on and lots of questions to ask here.
Yeah, we're all human dealing with this.
There is a lot of colors between the black and white, and while it may be the easiest choice, Sean, as we always said, if we may not have the answer, but if we made you think, we're pretty happy about the job we've done today. And Cody, I really like how you made it very understandable for everyone, and I thank you for that. That's it.
There we go. Let's go share some misinformation.
You do that. I'm gonna go on another platform.
All right. No, thanks everybody. Thanks, Cody.
Thank you.
BugCrowd's award-winning platform combines actionable contextual intelligence with the skill and experience of the world's most elite hackers to help leading organizations identify and fix vulnerabilities, protect customers, and make the digitally connected world a safer place. Learn more at bugcrowd.com. RSA Security offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk that hinges on integrated visibility, automated insights, and coordinated actions. Learn more at rsa.com. Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high-net-worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share ITSPmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.